Welcome back. We will start with lecture 2 today, lecture 2 of module 10. Module 10 we are looking at the communication. So, after the children have figured out the basic grammatical structure of the language, the semantics of the language, that is how the words what the words mean, how sentence structures are to be created, then they need to communicate. And in module in the lecture 1 of this module we have looked at some of the principles of communication that have been put forward in the literature, and the pre-verbal stage of children has to before they have started to communicate in language proper, what are the primary methods that the children use, the infants use for communication. So, now we will move on to the verbal communication. So, this is the verbal stage where they can use words, they can use sentences and indulge in the communicative process. So, in the verbal stage there are a number of things that happen. So, once the stage starts, infants need to hone the following skills. So, what are the skills? Speech acts, and then reference words use and referential communication, scalar implicature, turn taking and figurative language use. All of these are possible only after they have started the verbal stage. Pre-verbal stage, as we have discussed, it refers only to eye movement and then some gestures and pointing. So, pointing and non-pointing gestures and eye contact, but when they are using verbal language, verbal mode of language, then they can do a lot more. So, one of the most important things that we do with language, as Searle had talked about, we can do things with language, as in we do not just speak, but we can make some action happen with language, that is called speech act. We will not get into what speech act is, just restrict to what are the different kinds that Searle talked about. So, the most basic one is the assertive, when you simply state something that is happening. So, when you say it is raining, it is a simple statement of fact that it is actually raining. You can have another kind which is called directives. Directives is when you ask somebody to do something, the speaker wants the hearer to do something, act on the whatever the kind of a command or a request or whatever there is. So, could you please open the skylight is a request. So, this is called a directive, the speaker is requesting the person to the hearer to open the skylight. Commissives can be conveyed without using specific words through intonation. So, speaker commit themselves for a future action like promise, pledge, guarantee, so on and so forth. Similarly, you have expressive, you won. So, if you say you won like this, then it is this is a feeling expressed through tone most of the time. So, if you say you won in a particular tone, you might mean that I was not expecting you to win, or in another tone the same structure can mean that I am happy that you won, like this. So, these are called expressive because the intonation pattern expresses what you feel. That is another kind of speech act. Then you have declarations. So, declarations mean I declare you the winner of this tournament. Often these are used in a formal setup, in kind of a specific utterance for a specific kind of a context. So, I declare I declare you the winner of this tournament, I sentence you 10 years of imprisonment by a judge in a court. This kind of sentences will be called declarations. So, these are the speech acts as far as Searle is concerned. These are the ones that he gave. Now, this has been also studied in child language acquisition as to whether children can indulge in speech acts. Adults of course do can and do, but do infants also indulge in speech acts? This is what we are more interested in. So, from the age of 10 months, children can point to things they are interested in. We have already seen pointing in the first lecture as to how pointing is an important feature of pre-verbal behavior. That is what we are talking about. So, they also reach towards anything that interests them. These gestures have been viewed as proto forms of assertives and directives. So, if you are pointing to something, this is taken as a simple declaration of I want this, I want that toy. So, if the child is pointing, this is satisfying the speech act of the very first one, assertive or the simple one, the assertive one, that I want this is it, this is my toy or something like that. and when they are reaching out for something, pointing and reaching are slightly different. So, when they are trying to reaching for something, they are probably asking you to, this is where the directive comes in. What is directive? Asking somebody. So, would you please open, you can request, you can order or whatever, but here the child is basically asking the caregiver, whoever is the caregiver, to get him or her that particular thing, toy or a book or whatever. That is why it is taken as a directive. So, these points and reaches combine with single words to express different intentions. They can occur only in isolation, only as pointing, or also when, because by the time they are 10 months or 1 year of age, they start to speak in words. Some children can use even 2 words. So, in this situation they are using single words and then combining it with the gestures to create different kinds of, to express different kinds of speech acts. So, different kinds of intentions, as a result of which this is called the first speech acts performed by children. So, as for Greenfield and Smith 1976, so this is how they have categorized the different kinds of speech acts with respect to different kinds of gesture as well as simple words, as they say. So, assertion, utterance, record plus point. So, what their meaning context was pointing at a record player with record on. So, meaning that this is a recorder or something, record, the was absent. Assertion again, the car and then looking at the car, turning to the window, car passing outside. So, this is an assertion that is a car. So, car and then looking at it. So, this is taken as an assertion, that the assertive speech act. Request, record and then start to whine. So, in here the record player just turned off, child wants it on. So, the record player was playing and then he or she says record and then starts to whine, that means this is a request. Similarly, car, look at the car and then start whining, wanting the toy car that had just fallen on the floor. So, these are some of the speech acts as far as Greenfield and Smith is concerned, this particular publication is concerned with respect to Searle's speech act theory. The children are also able, infants are also capable of indulging in speech acts. So, this is about speech act. Another important domain of the initial verbal communication strategies by children is in the domain of reference. Reference as in what a particular thing refers to. So, what is the relationship between what you say and what is there, what does it refer to in the real world. So, referential communication is again a joint activity between the speaker and the hearer. So, this is not something that the person does alone, this is a collaboration again. We talked about collaboration in the beginning of this module, that communication always is a collaborative affair, any kind of conversation is a collaboration. So, within that collaborative context, reference is one of the most important things. So, this is dependent on the interlocutor's pragmatic competence. So, what the other person is trying to say, you have to understand. So, appropriate use of referential expression warrants the speaker's ability to take the hearer's perspective, and this refers to the apt assessment of his knowledge state, right. So, if you are referring to something and you need to understand what the hearer will understand. If you are referring to something the hearer simply does not know, then there is no point of that, there will not be any successful communication. Similarly, the hearer should also be able to track the speaker's intention. So, a referential communication is works both ways. Both the speaker and the hearer need to be aware of the other person's mental state, what he or she might be referring to and what he or she might not be referring to at the same time. Thus, the developmental trajectory of reference provides important, this is very important. So, how do the children, how do infants understand what is the developmental what are the developmental stages through which the child perfects this particular understanding. This will give us a window to the minds of the infant as to how they really develop their pragmatic abilities. Pragmatic abilities also has to do with their cognitive abilities. How do you understand the other person's standpoint? How do you infer the other person's standpoint? So, this is what we are talking about here when we say referring. So, using language to refer, In communicative context, we use language or linguistic terms to refer to something. We say book to refer to a book, to an actual book in the real world. So, the linguistic reference is the relationship between words and phrases and entities in the world. So, this is what we mean by linguistic reference. So, for which we have words or phrases or whatever. So, using a linguistic tool to refer to something, this is what is called linguistic reference. Like the relationship between noun phrase the dog and the specific dog in the world, because it is the dog, it is specific, it is a specific dog. If we had used a dog, it will be any dog in the world. So, this is what I mean by reference. So, referential assignment links the abstract system of language to objects, properties, events and other very different kinds of entities in the world, and hence it is at the fundamental level of communication. Now, methods for doing this, methods for understanding, comprehending. So, we will talk about both comprehension and production of referential communication, starting with comprehending. So, for very young learners with limited vocabulary, when they are just starting to speak in words, assigning linguistic reference involves a process that also often serves to establish meaning for unfamiliar word. What does this mean? This basically means that when the child is at the very initial stage of word learning, the understanding of reference of a novel word, whatever the caregiver might be using. So, caregiver uses a novel word and then shows a novel object, the child eventually uses it as a tool to learn the word meaning. So, they are basically building up their vocabulary through referential understanding. So, that child has to have that ability at that stage to infer the meaning, to get the understanding that this novel word refers to something in the real world, which is this particular object. So, this is what we mean by this is an important tool for word learning, unfamiliar words, unfamiliar sentences, unfamiliar concepts and so on and so forth. Infants use different types of socio-pragmatic information to delimit the set of potential meanings and reference for an unfamiliar expression used by the speaker. This is something we have discussed at length when we discussed about the word learning words. So, we will not go there. The speaker's direction of gaze is also among the most important. Now, what is the speaker looking at? Not only often what happens when the caregivers are talking to an infant, they will not simply say a novel word, they will also look at the object, and children figure out very early in life that following the eye movement of the speaker, they can actually find out the referent of the novel word, and hence the speaker's direction of gaze is an important factor in this. So, studies have shown that eye gaze monitoring helps in learning new words, and this is also useful in terms of long term understanding. So, children also figure it out in the beginning. We talked about responding to joint attention. This is exactly what we meant there. So, the caregiver is looking at something, the child follows the gaze and thereby gets the meaning of the novel word. Now, successful communication of reference depends on a number of means. So, when they are speaking, when they are producing word as opposed to comprehension as we just saw, they use a number of tools, they use a number of socio-cultural methods to get to it. So, as they initially in the pre-linguistic stage we have seen the pointing and gestures, and as they grow they start to use and comprehend different types of reference words like in English. We are giving example here in English. So, the personal pronouns like it, diacritics like this, there, definite versus indefinite, noun phrase like the cup versus a cup in English language, modified noun phrase the short red cup and so on. So, learning these linguistic items, these linguistic markers will help them pick out the objects and other entities in the world. So, when they in the initial stages of learning, they will be once they get to know that the cup is different from a cup, this will help them locate the object in the real world in much better way. Similarly, when they start speaking, they will do the same. So, the choice and interpretation of these devices during referential communication largely depend on expectation of informativeness. So, this is where we connect the processes that the child goes through and indulges in to maximum of Grice, so the quantity. So, depending on what you are choosing, which linguistic item you are choosing and what are the other methods that you are using will depend on the expectation of informativeness. Typically, we do not most of the common conversations are informative, exactly adequately informative. So, that is taken as a given. So, within that children perform. So, this means the speaker needs to keep in mind what information is shared and not by a conversation partner. This has been studied at length by these by the authors Clark and group. An effective speaker chooses informationally appropriate words and phrases to refer to things in the world by taking into account what the informer or what the listener is likely to know. So, if you cannot talk about something that the speaker has no clue about. So, in an effective communication setup, this has to be taken into account. So, using reference words, now we will look at some studies that have some findings in this regard. So, the basic idea is that reference means understanding the linguistic unit and its whatever it is pointing to in the real world. That takes into account the child's comprehension as well as using of those linguistic items. So, what are those linguistic items? They might be simple like deictic terms or pronouns or nouns etc. right. So, now let us go to the examples. Studies have shown that they are good at taking the perspective of the listener into account. So, 14-month-old German children responded differently depending on which toy the speaker had previously played with. Question was the other person, the adult was asking, where is the other toy, can you give it to me? Now, when the person is asking where is the other toy, the child already understands the toy that the experimenter is talking about is the one that he has not seen, that he has not played with, because the word other has been used. So, by decoding this message, the child is trying to understand the speaker's mindset at that given point of time, and they are able to respond accordingly. Similarly, children adjust the informational content of the referential devices they use based on the needs of their addressees. For example, many studies have looked at it, one of them I have quoted here. So, what they found was they use pointing and verbal language to indicate the location of a hidden toy, hidden for the mother. So, they kept on pointing to a hidden object that the child knew, but the mother did not. So, they used a combination of gestures as well as language. Similarly, when pointing gesture was not enough to refer to an out of reach toy with a specific sticker, they used verbal description, not only pointing. So, they depending on they are taking into account their addressees, their hearers perspective. In the second case, the child was asking for a toy which was out of reach for her, and but the mother could not figure it out which one she is talking about, and that toy there was a particular one which had some kind of a specific sticker attached to it. So, that is when they stopped pointing and started using more of verbal language. So, this is taken as an example that children are capable of understanding the mental state of the hearer. So, in English, most of these examples come from studies on English speaking children, at least the ones that I have quoted here are mostly. So, in English, when introducing an object for the first time in conversation, the indefinite article a or an will be used, not the, and subsequently the will be used. So, whenever you are trying to refer to the object that has already been talked about. So, let us say the mother talks about a cat, a story about a cat and what all the cat was doing. So, when she introduces the cat, she will say there was a cat in my neighbor's house like this, and successively whenever she is referring to the cat, she will say the cat. This is how English language works. So, these kind of reference terms lie on a scale of accessibility, this is the technical term. So, when you are how accessible the term is in your mind. So, which is determined by the degree to which the referent is active in the hearer's consciousness. Similarly, the use of nouns and pronouns. So, when you introduce a new object, you use noun, subsequently you will be using a pronoun to refer to the same thing, and the the equivalence of this is the scale of accessibility, how accessible the object is. So, if the referent is introduced recently in the conversation, then it is assumed to be highly accessible to the hearer's mind, hence pronouns will be used. But if the referent is completely new, then a pronoun cannot sufficiently distinguish between many possible referents, and as a result of which you will be using a noun. Now, this has been seen in slightly older children, but not younger. So, 3 years and 4 years, Tomasello and group found out this particular behavior in 3 and 4-year-olds, but not in 2-year-olds. So, they use the full phrase, the clown is jumping, and when the listener could not see the events being described, but less informative expressions, they say he is jumping. So, when the person he was talking to could not see the events. So, then she describes, he or she describes that the clown is jumping, the fully informative sentence. Remember our Grice's maxim of informativeness. So, there they know that the person he is talking to does not know what is happening. So, she gives the entire sentence, the clown is jumping, but when it is visible to the other person, then less informative, he is jumping. So, when the listener could see the events. In many other studies, for example, in one recent study in 2015, 1 to 4-year-old children viewed short videos in which a speaker named one of the 2 toys. During the naming, first they viewed the short videos where the person was naming things, and then when the child has to name, children of all age groups were shown to spend most of the time looking at the speaker's face, because they use the speaker's gaze direction to locate the correct target toy. So, when they had to name the toy, first they saw the video where the adult was naming the toy, which means the adult was naming the toy by looking at it, and that is why when the child was asked to name the toy, they were looking at the adult's face to figure out which one is the referent. So, this is again another way to see that children actually figured out using various kinds of social cues the reference of the words. Similarly, there are many other complex factors. For example, discourse novelty and speaker intent have also been studied. So, 2-year-old children assigned a new label to an object that was novel to their interlocutors, but not to themselves. They already knew the object, but they were asked to give a label to the object which the other person has not seen. So, they could do it pretty well. So, in a related study, 2-year-olds assigned labels to objects that were presented in an intentionally, but not in an accidentally novel context. So, basically changing the context of the conversation, the researchers tried to see what the child does. So, these what they found out was the child could assign labels according to the situation of the interlocutor. So, if they did not know, they used the proper nouns and proper kind of articles, and if they knew it, they did not. So, the results show that children actively monitored their communicative exchanges with other interlocutors and use this information to interpret the referential intentions of these interlocutors. So, basically a number of works in this domain suggest that children are generally aware of the factors governing the use of reference words in a particular given situation. However, it takes a little while for them to use them like adults. For example, so we saw with many examples that they do understand the interlocutors, meaning the other person's intent and mental state, but this does not mean that they can use the understanding as an adult. So, that takes a little bit of time. For example, one particular study looked at this from 3 language groups like Korean, Inuktitut and Italian. Children aged between 1.5 and 3 years were used were subjects for this, and their spontaneous speech was studied. In all the 3 languages, it is possible to omit the reference word if the referent is very accessible. For example, it is grammatical to say drinking some milk and omit the cat when the reference was easily accessible from the previous discourse in the matter. It is possible in Indian languages also. So, you do not need to. If you have just talked about the cat in the previous sentence, then you can follow it up with just drinking the milk, not saying the cat was drinking the milk. So, across all these 3 languages, the result found, that is the result that they had, that across all the 3 languages, children were sensitive to this constraint. That means, they behaved like the adults would do. Like adults, they were found to omit the reference words when the referent was easily accessible. So, they all omitted the cat, the word the cat, not the cat itself. However, if this is not the case, children tended to produce a word to identify it, often in a full noun phrase. So, basically what they found out was, in a cross linguistic study, children do understand this, that when the word was introduced recently, they do not need to, because the grammar of these languages allow this, that you do not need to use the subject all the time, and they could do it as well. However, they did not do this 100% of the time. That means, they had some errors, though they could do it on many occasions, but some cases they did not. In many cases, they were under informative and introduced a new topic of conversation without specifying who or what she is referring to. So, in the flow of conversation, the children were also found to be under informative. Suddenly, they introduced a new object without saying what it was. So, that is the finding of this particular study, basically pointing to the fact that though children do understand these things, they do figure them out, they also figure out the other person's intentions and mental states and knowledge state and so on, but they are not always correct, they do make mistakes. So, they can be over informative, under informative. For example, a sentence like, look at the cat is drinking milk. There is no need for to repeat the cat in the second sentence. Here pronouns could have been used, but they do not. So, overall the finding is that children take time to learn all the factors responsible for choosing the correct reference word. So, this is about reference. So, what is the in a nutshell about this whole idea about reference is that you understand that the words linguistic labels refer to something in the world, but the way you encode that information in your language depends on your understanding of the interlocutor, the hearer, the other person in the conversation setup. And children tend to have behavioral output that show that they do figure this out to a large extent, if not 100% of the time. So, this is where we complete our lecture 2 of this module. In lecture 3, we will take up another aspect of the communicative competence. Thank you.